Hey, warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by one of our good friends, Rocco Miller. He does such great work over at Bracketeer.org, Basket Under Review, The Field of 68, and he is a man that does a lot with helping these teams out with scheduling. So we're going to chat with him about just what that process is like, how we take a look at things in terms of what to expect out of these teams, and we've got right now about 2,000 players in the transfer portal. I'll, as a matter of fact, hit refresh right now, verbal commits. That's how I track a lot of these transfers because it actually updates by the minute. Right now, 1,988 players are currently in the transfer portal, and that'll probably be above 2,000 by the time this podcast uploads, but I mean, we've got a lot of, shall we say, moving parts right now. Do teams like to schedule right now? Are they going to be waiting a few weeks? Is it based on NIL? We're going to be chatting a little bit about that, some takeaways that you had from this upcoming season, and if that might influence the way that we see this offseason played out with a lot of big men getting some big money here. I'm fully expecting that, and we've already seen a few big men come off the board. And then in the final segment, I will be getting you guys a roundup of all that we saw in college basketball on Thursday in terms of a few guys that decided to actually commit to a school. So we do have a few guys coming off the board, and I'll also ask our good friend Rocco when we can expect to see a few more of these signings as well, because it's been a little bit slow going here in the first few days. We did see quite a few guys from the great state of Mississippi that decided where they're going to be going, but right now, it's a little bit of question mark there. Also, have to mention with them what we're all going to be seeing in terms of the eligibility, because we saw the NCAA propose that age clock that it begins at 19 years old and you only have 5 years to complete it after you turn 19. Obviously, there's the Donald Trump executive order as well, and that has not stopped any of these guys that have transferred multiple times to be entering into the transfer portal as well. So we're going to be chatting about that and so much more. And then in the final segment, get you guys that roundup of what we've seen here in college basketball here over the last few days with guys that have actually signed with the team. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, do have one or two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I know that I've been asked this by a few people. I've been on a few shows and they've asked me, how do you take a look at the college basketball futures market right now? For one, those that listen to this podcast know that I'm very much more a game-to-game guy. I really don't dive into the futures market to start with. I want to be looking at things just at a one game at a time sort of ordeal. That's really been where my success has come over the years. But that said, if you're looking to play the futures market, I would say you just kick back and relax right now. Keep in mind the team that just most recently won the title in Michigan. At this time last year, I think Will Shedder and Nobari Burnett were like the lone two guys on the roster, because keep in mind, Yaxel Lendeborg was toying with the idea of going into the NBA draft or not. Like, he didn't sign with Michigan until late in the process. Elliot Kadu was a nice pickup, but I know that there were a lot of people that were down on him. They were thinking that there would need to be some weapons around him, and certainly Michigan was able to pack those, but I would say that at this point, you just want to be kicking back and relaxing, and additionally, even if you think that you have some value on a future, do you really want to be tying up your money for 12 months? Like, that's a big thing as well, because you can have a lot of fun betting game to game in the NFL, NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs. I personally am a baseball guy personally. Like, there's a lot of other things you can do. Like, you can go out to a steakhouse right now. Like, I'm just not a believer in tying up my money for 12 months, even if you think that you've got yourself a little bit of an edge. And how do you know that you're going to be able to have an edge as well? Because, like, the team that was really getting a lot of, shall we say, hype in the offseason last year, a lot of people thought that they had value on their Purdue futures tickets. We saw those turned out as well. So I think now is the time, and I always use this on the podcast every single year, and I'll use it once again here. This is the hunting and gathering stage. This is a point where whether you're a game-to-game bettor, whether you're a futures bettor, what have you, you just sit back, you let things play themselves out, you see how these teams are trying to form themselves for next year, you don't press the panic button on anything like that, you don't force up futures bets or anything like that, just let things play out. If an opportunity presents itself, then you end up acting. But let the opportunity come to you. Don't try to force the opportunity right now, I think is the biggest thing. And we're going to get a little bit more of a behind-the-scenes look as to what all happens in the offseason. Because like I said, Rocco, he does such a great job with regards to scheduling. He knows so many of these coaches. He has such great information to be shared all 12 months out of the year. He does a lot during the offseason for these teams. So we're going to chat with him about just so many things on the flip side about what is all happening with regards to eligibility, these teams setting up their schedules, trying to sign guys, and so much more right here on Coast to Coast Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man as we've got Rocco Miller aboard. He does such great work over at Bracketeer.org looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball, and he really is dialed in all 12 months of the year. Many people think that now this is the offseason for college basketball, but he's doing a great job helping these teams out with scheduling. He's taking a look forward to the upcoming college basketball season. He's all over the place, whether that be Field of 68, Basket Under Review, his own website, Bracketeer.org, and so much more. And you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at his first and last name, Rocco Miller, the number 8 altogether. And Rocco, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
It's great to be back with you, Greg. Hope you enjoyed the end of the year. We had some good theater there, I thought, in the national title game earlier this week. And yeah, I mean, there's no rest for the wicked when you're talking about the transfer portal and scheduling. They go hand in hand. For me, we're seeing new names pop up every hour. We're seeing new commitments probably starting every hour here as we get towards the end of this week and into the weekend. So I think it's going to be fast and furious. We're going to have this thing figured out within a month in terms of the rosters. But in terms of scheduling, we're just getting warmed up.
Absolutely. And how much do a lot of these teams want to wait on scheduling until they do see what happens in the transfer portal? Because right now, as I took a look at things on verbal commits, 1,988 players are in the transfer portal, and less than 50 have committed to a new Division I school. So obviously there's lots of question marks there. But how long does that process typically take, for one, in terms of these guys signing with new teams, and for two, just being able to know what you've got for a roster to be able to set those schedules?
Yeah, well, I think it's a little bit of a dance, right? You know, I think with bigger schools, like the top of the sport type of schools, you can feel very safe in terms of picking up your money games against the bottom of the sport. That stuff's not going to change a whole lot, especially if you're talking about buying teams in the 330 to 365 range. Seldom do you see a team go from that low in the country to like a top 150 team. So those are pretty simple from where I'm sitting. It also is okay to take a very predictable opening game. You know, earlier today, I announced that Ohio State's going to play BYU on opening night. That's a pretty safe play by both teams, knowing that BYU has a very hefty amount of money to invest in their roster. Ohio State's in the Big Ten. They're a power school. They're going to be similar to BYU in terms of what they're able to spend. So really, even though they don't have all their rosters filled out, I don't feel like there's a lot of risk to making that happen. And I do believe they have agreed to return that to Ohio in a year, somewhere near Columbus. I'm assuming Cleveland, but we'll wait for the official announcement later this spring. But that's a good example. You can pick those types of games up. You might want to leave a few spots just because of the amount of teams that you might potentially face that you don't know how good they're going to be. I think that's where mid-major teams are really stuck with scheduling. They really can't afford to take the risk if they feel like they have a strong team. They want to play quad 1 and 2 games, but they have to get there by playing Santa Clara, St. Mary's, or, VCU or Dayton. Like, you just don't know exactly what their ceiling and floors are yet. And it just kind of goes like that all the way until you get to about number 200 in the country. So everybody between 75 and 200, very difficult to predict where they're going to land. It will still be difficult later in the summer, but at least if they do pick up a couple big names, it's a tough game. Or if they just fail and lose resources, bad game. So there's an entire dance to it, and then you only have so many spots you got to work with for scheduling games.
Yep, I think that is so key as well, and it's going to be interesting to see how those teams are going to be addressing this offseason, as well as Rocco Miller, who does such great work over at Bracketeer.org, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and you've covered this long enough to know that even though the old adage is guards win in March, typically it's the big men that always get paid a little bit more than the guards, because we saw that with Hunter Dickinson a few years ago. You go back to Great Osobor pretty much being the entire Washington roster a few years ago, and certainly teams are very much looking to go after big men. But how much more of an emphasis and how much more are these big men, do you think, going to get paid this past offseason with the success that we saw out of Arizona, Michigan, and just so many of these teams to where, yeah, the guard play was good, and we saw Elliot Kadu decide to re-up with Michigan. I thought that was a great move, but let's call it what it is. It felt like the best teams in college basketball this year, they had good guard play, but maybe not amazing, but they had absolutely amazing low post play.
Yeah, well, I think it starts at the top, right? The three best leagues were clearly the Big 12, a lot of top heavy action in the Big 12 this year. With, for a lot of the season, 6 elite teams, it really became 5 elite teams, with BYU dropping off down the stretch a little bit with the injury. But you look at the Big 10, obviously Michigan right there at the top. Michigan State was physical and big and had advantages. Illinois was massive and got to the Final Four. And then you look at the SEC, completely dominated by Florida, who once again had a significant size advantage, overwhelming size in the front court. Chinyalu, became a monster and a little bit of an offensive threat as well. He's always been a defensive monster. So you look across the 3 leagues and you're like, this is the way to build a roster. If you have the means to do so now, several teams, even within those 3 leagues, do not have the means to build a roster like that. So they have to get more creative. They have to get a little more strategic, maybe figure out other ways to win, or maybe they go all in on 1 or 2 big men and try to make up the gap in other areas of the floor. But that is clearly the arms race right now for the top 25 or 30 spenders in the portal. Pretty clear who those teams are. You look at a St. John's team who's going to host Mohamed Diabate this weekend. They're believed to be a finalist for JOP out of Arizona State. It's probably down to them or Gonzaga, from what I've heard recently. And so you'd think St. John's is getting at least 1 or the 2. They're clearly throwing around resources that help. You see Michigan, they've already got JP Estrella committed now. That would probably be one where they named a number. Estrella's, if he agreed to it, they're basically shutting it down. And that's another tactic teams use to kind of get these guys in the portal, out of the portal quickly. If you agree to commit on the spot, they'll shut it down for a certain amount. And so the evaluations have to be sharp for that to work, but Michigan's certainly not a team you want to doubt. And then if you're building a team, maybe on the cutting edge, whether you're Iowa, Nebraska, teams in that part of the Big Ten standings or pecking order, you need to either figure out how you're going to match up with them and get your own size going and play to a way that will be better than Michigan or be able to beat Michigan. And the same goes for teams in the middle of the SEC with Florida. And of course, in the Big 12 with those elite teams that are just always going to be there, whether it's Arizona, Kansas, Houston, Iowa State, Texas Tech, right? So, and BYU, they're going to reload as well. So it's a difficult job, and you're kind of not in that first or second tier in those conferences, because your chances of actually finding human beings capable of slowing those guys down or just, being able to out-rebound them, all the little things of the game that add up. They have very difficult tasks in front of them this spring.
They certainly do, as Rocco Miller does such great work over at Bracketeer.org is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and something that I've been talking about the last few days, and I want to get your thoughts here because I'm pretty sure that you know a little bit more about legal juncture and documents than I do, because I went to school over at UW Oshkosh. Love UW Oshkosh, but went to school for radio, TV, film to try to avoid some of these. But we saw the Donald Trump document that got signed a few days ago / a week ago that was trying to mandate that a player only got 1 transfer before they had to sit out a year. We know that the NCAA is trying to start the clock at 19 to where you have to finish within 5 years once you turn 19. How much has that affected these teams if at all, here in the offseason, because I'm noticing a lot of guys that, well, they have transferred more than once before, are currently in the transfer portal, and it seems like there's plenty of interest, and it doesn't feel like schools are very deterred by what we have seen over the last 7 days from the NCAA and Mr. Trump.
Yeah, well, I just think it was an executive order that was passed, and so that can be pretty easily challenged in court. And with those same precedents that were established before with the Alston case, the O'Bannon case, that's what basically opened the floodgates previously. So it's important to, go back to those cases specifically if you really want to get into it. But I think when it comes down to it, it's more logical that everybody gets behind the 5-year clock, which Yahoo and Ross Dellinger reported here earlier this week, which I do think has a lot of momentum across all levels of college sports. Basically, starting at age 19, you have a 5-year clock to finish, and then you take away the redshirt year. I think that makes all the sense in the world. And I just don't know if you're going to stop somebody from transferring more than once and making them sit out, especially if the clock part of it goes forward. And the main thing about the transfer piece is, again, like there's already precedent now. The judge has ruled that players are free to go as long as coaches are free to go. So I just don't know how, long term, a federal judge or state by state judge, goes along with the executive order once it gets challenged. That's certainly something that would get challenged pretty quickly, if depending on who wants to try to enforce it, right? That's the other thing. If the NCAA tries to enforce something, they're going right back to court. So do they really want to try to enforce something that doesn't make sense for the larger, greater good of the sport? That remains to be seen. But we've seen several times in the last couple of years where the NCAA just kind of got out of the way to avoid more lawyer fees, if you will.
Yep, exactly. And it's been very interesting to take a look at what we've gotten here in the offseason, as it does not feel like there's a lot of, shall we say, threats right now. And as we know with the NCAA, they have been the equivalent of the Washington Generals when it comes to the court system as well. So that's certainly something to be taking a look at. And with regards to what we're going to be seeing this offseason, do you think that there's going to be anything different with this offseason compared to last offseason? Because right now we've had the portal open up on, I believe it was Tuesday after the national title game. And like I said, 2,000 guys have already entered into the NCAA, have already entered into the portal. But that said, is there just anything that you're looking at for this offseason that you feel like might be different from the past few off seasons that we've seen?
Well, I think things are stabilizing a little bit more. I felt like the last couple of off seasons there was room for teams to move up at the top of the sport. I just think now it's so simple that it's straight money. Whereas you have the teams that really did well this year, they're going to continue to not only get investments, but maybe even more investments than last year. Whether it's Michigan or St. John's or Connecticut or the teams I mentioned before from the Big 12 and the Big 10 and the SEC as well to a degree. But I do think there are teams that you might have saw last year spend a lot, like Washington and USC and some of those places that it didn't go well, like they didn't get to the tournament. And you might see them withhold money this year, and they'll have a much different looking roster next year because they can't just fling offers all over the place because that money starts to go away. And so that's the most interesting thing, is trying to figure out how much everybody's going to have to work with. If you start to follow the tweets and the rumors on the message boards, they're usually like inflated numbers. So trying to decipher what's real and what's not is a difficult task. And I try not to take it that seriously. What I'm looking at it as, there's certainly a curve and a hierarchy at the top. You want certain players, like a JP Estrella, just go into Michigan in an instant, earlier in the week. That is a great example of, okay, Michigan's got the means to get whoever they need that fits them. And they clearly, that was their first phone call done. Right. So that's at the very top. But then when you get to the middle, maybe there's a good fit and they're hoping somebody lands to them. Or if you're like a Santa Clara who's been amazing at redshirting players, you don't have to pay as much to get a guy to redshirt, and then he can perform like Alan Graves this year, became a superstar, Podzinski, a few years back. So they have a track record in that way. You have to find your niches from that regard. And then in the smaller leagues, you look at the MAC, and you get like Khalil Fennell, who's an amazing coach out of UT Rio Grande Valley, to come to Western Michigan. And not only do they hire him, but they gave him a brand new, set of toys. I think he's got $1 million or $2 million to spend, which at the MAC level is very substantial. Like they could easily be top 3 in the MAC. And this is a team that's struggled to even make the MAC tournament in the past. And now you could quickly argue they're a top 3 MAC team with Miami, Ohio having to replace everybody, with Akron losing their head coach, John Grosh, to to Charleston. So there's fascinating elements to this. We could go league by league. And of course, we'll learn more about the mid-major level and all the different levels within that as the spring goes on. I'll be working on that. Yeah, it's just fascinating because kind of any of the level, there's going to be a hierarchy based on the money and based on the evaluations. I just think at the very top, things are very standardized now. We pretty much can predict out of the top 30 or 40 teams to start next year, we probably already know about 80 to 90% of them just because the money side of it, without realizing, without knowing exactly who the players are yet.
Yep, and that's a big thing as well. You know who's going to spend, you know who's maybe on the borderline of doing so, and who just doesn't have the resources. I think that that's so well said by you, and I do think that it's going to be a very interesting offseason. Rocco, I know you've got a lot of work to do to help out these teams with regards to scheduling. I know you're doing a great job keeping your finger on the pulse of all that we are getting here in the transfer portal and so much more. So let the good people at home know what's on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I appreciate that. So coming up later this week, we have an exclusive interview between myself and Belmont's new head coach, Evan Brads. I thought it was a fascinating discussion. We went on for about 30 minutes. So make sure to check that out at basketunderreview.com. I think I'll be continuing to do those. There was one that dropped earlier in the week with new St. Mary's head coach, Mickey McConnell. Obviously, a seismic shift in Moraga with Randy Bennett going to Arizona State. So I'm certainly looking to get Randy to come on one-on-one with me probably in May once his health gets sorted out and they get a roster put together. But I'll continue to do special interest stories like that through Basket Under Review this summer. You can find me at bracketeer.org, where we are already hard at work on non-conference schedule pages. Depending on how things come in and how information comes in, we'd like to have those top couple conferences live and available by May. I know all the head coaches across the country love it because they can just come on there, see who's got who needs how many more games and what dates. So that's certainly coming, but we'll also continue to do different stories as well. I'm actually doing college baseball forecasting if you're into that. Yeah, so starting next Wednesday, I'll have that once a week. I actually did amazing last year. I can't believe that. I got all the hosts right. I got all 64 right. So I have a big bar to reach for this year. So I'm looking forward to doing that just as a side task to not be completely obsessed with scheduling. And then you can follow me on Twitter for all the schedule news, updates, anything I'm hearing at Rocco Miller, the number 8. And that's on Twitter and also Blue Sky.
And Rocco, he does such a great job looking at the sport of college basketball all 12 months out of the year. Love to see him getting in on the baseball as well. I'm an MLB guy, so that's always good fun. And every single time Rocco joins us, we always get smarter. So a big thanks to Rocco for joining me on Coast to Coast Superstar, part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming next, we did have a few players decide what team they're going to be playing for next year. I'll give you guys a roundup of that next. And we're back here, lovely Las Vegas, for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always so great to be joined by Rocco Miller. He does amazing work over at bracketeer.org, and he is a man that is so tied in with this wonderful game of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. He did so once again today, so a big thanks to Rocco for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a little bit of a roundup as to the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. This one happened a little bit more than 24 hours ago. I missed this one yesterday, but Michael Nwoko, he has decided that he is going to be going to Xavier after he had a nice year last year over at LSU. 13.5 points, 6 boards per contest. He's now going to be joining the, shall we say, Patinos over there with Xavier, a guy that is not going to really stretch the floor, but with Xavier, they were a team that was pretty rock solid with regards to not allowing second and third chances on the glass. They're now going to be able to beef up a little bit more down low. We'll see how much of that backcourt they maintain from a season ago, but that's a good starting spot for Xavier. So I do like that pickup for them. You saw quite a few guys from the great state of Mississippi decide where they're going to be going. Hopefully I get this one correct, but Eduardo Klofke, he was averaging about 4.5 points per contest and did shoot 42.5% from three-point range for Ole Miss last season. He was a part-time starter for them. He has decided where he is going to be ending up, and he landed at Butler. I know that there's many of these Big East schools that are going to be airing out how much money they're spending on all these players, what have you, and for Butler, they're looking to make things as shall we say, good as possible for Ronald Norad. You may recall he was a part of those title teams from a few seasons ago under Brad Stevens. He was actually a player on those teams. He gets a nice add here in Klofke, who's going to be able to help out because they do lose the likes of a Finley Bizjack in the offseason. They're going to need to revamp this roster. That's a good place to start, in my opinion. So I do like that one. For Michigan, they had themselves a very nice Thursday as well because they got pretty much two pickups. One of them is one of the guys that they already had, Elliot Kadu. He has decided that he is going to be back. He is re-signing with the team, and this is big. And I think that it's actually bigger news when you do have a guy re-sign with a team because more guys enter the transfer portal than actually stay with their respective teams. And for Kadu, most outstanding player in the Final Four, he was able to do a nice job supplying 10.5 points, shot 37.5% from three, 5.9 assists per game. Michigan, before he got there in year number one under Dusty May, they really had some issues with regards to turnovers, and not to say that they were completely clean this past season, but still, he was really able to help out that backcourt so much, so he was such a big part of that team. That is very much well-deserved by him. And then for JP Estrella, he's going to be joining Michigan as well. I think that this is such a great fit. He was over at Tennessee as a part-time starter last season. 10 points, 5.5 boards. Didn't pop a lot of threes at 6'11". On the few threes that he popped, he actually shot 40% from the outside. As we know, Michigan, they're probably going to need to replace Ade Mara. I'm thinking that he's going to be going to the NBA draft. Yes, Lendeborg, he's used up all of his eligibility, so bringing in a guy like an Estrella to be able to pass the torch down to, I think is going to be tremendous for them. You did see David Iwaize, hopefully I said that correct. He was over at Utah State this past season, and he has decided that he is going to be following his coach. He's going to be going on over to Cincinnati. You find this a lot because with Cincinnati, Jared Calhoun, he becomes a new coach after he was there over at Utah State. And for Iwaize, he was a guy that a lot of people rated as like a top 250 recruit, 6'10" big man, just did not get out there on the floor this past season. Took a redshirt year, so we'll see what he's able to offer the team. But we are seeing these coaches that were hired on the offseason try to bring in some of their own. We've already seen that with Syracuse and Jerry McNamara, so a nice move there. You did see a guy decide to return to school, Enrique Schulte. He was last season over at Fordham, and he was a big part of why Fordham was so good on the glass last year. 10.5 points, 9 rebounds. He was able to give the team a steal and a half per contest. Entered into the transfer portal. He's decided that he is going to be sticking with Mike Magpio, who he played under over at UC Riverside a few seasons ago as well, so nice to be able to see that. Entered in the portal, but decided that he was going to come back to where he came. And just because a player enters into the transfer portal does not mean that they're automatically going to be transferring schools. A lot of times they do, let's call it what it is, but still, it's not a end-all be-all that they're not going to return to their old school. And for Schulte, he decided that he was going to be coming back to where he came. Miles Byrd, he's given the bird to San Diego State, and he has decided that he is going to be going to Providence. So we've seen the Big East schools starting to get busy after it was a lackluster year this past year. Obviously with Providence, they're going to be going into a new era as they bring on Brian Hodgson from Arkansas State. And for Byrd, last season, very nice year over at San Diego State. Did take a little bit of a dive in his scoring from 2 years ago, 2024-25 season. He was averaging about 12.5 points per game, but only shot 30% from three. This past year, shot it a little bit better from three, 10.5 points, 2 steals, 4.5 boards, 2.5 assists per game. He's just a textbook Brian Hodgson guy at 6'7". Is he going to light it up from three? No, even this last year, he shot like 30.8% from three-point range. Same time, too, I do think that he's going to be able to go out there, have a nice impact on this team. His overall versatility is going to be massive for them, so I do like that pickup for them. I love this pickup as well as you had Sam Orme. He was over at Belmont. He was really the number 2 guy to Tyler Lundblade this last season, but he was a guy that was just a mixer and shaker, did a little bit of everything, 12.5 points, 5 boards at 6'8", shot about 39.5% for three. He's heading to Nebraska. As we know with Nebraska, they had some good versatility with rink mass, and he's like an inch or two lower than that. With Mass, he was right around about 6'9", 6'10", but he's got a very similar skill set. Belmont was actually a really good defensive team away from him last season as well. I think that he's going to fit really well in that system, so that is a tremendous pickup for them, and I think that that is going to be able to help them out moving forward. You did see UCLA get a few pickups as well in Siraj Makura. Hopefully I said that correct. He was playing over at Mississippi State last season. And Philip Jovic, he was playing over at Auburn last year. So they bring in a pair of guys from the SEC. Looking at Jovic first because I do think that he's going to be the guy, the two that makes the biggest impact. And he had himself a nice year this last year. As a freshman, he saw a few starts. Not a guy that's going to light it up from three as a 6'8" gentleman that comes over from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but 6.5 points, 4 boards. He had a nice impact in that that NIT run in the final 4 games of the NIT, had 12 plus points in every one of them. He was able to generate a few turnovers, and that's big because the UCLA system is very much based around being able to generate steals, being able to generate turnovers. He's going to be able to help out with that, so I do think that this is a good pickup, and that is going to be a good fit for them. And then with Mikura coming on over from the great state of Mississippi, last season he averaged at 6'9", and he's another international man of mystery. Comes over from Slovenia. He averaged about 5 points, 4.8 boards per contest. Not necessarily a sharpshooter from 3, so feels like UCLA, after they were one of the better 3-point shooting teams in all of college basketball, they might be trying to take a little bit of a different approach. They weren't necessarily the world's greatest team on the glass. They add size here with Jovic along with Mikura, two guys that stood right around about 6'7", 6'8". We'll see if they're going to be continuing that moving forward, but they clearly are going in a little bit of a different direction, so we'll see if that pans out for them, and if they just decide that, hey, we need to get the big men here early, and then we're going to go after some more guard play moving forward. And then Julian Gomez, he was over at UT Rio Grande Valley this last season. Nice 3-point shooter, shot 43.7% from 3, 7.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. Might not sound significant, but him going on over to Western Michigan is big for Western Michigan. He saw 21 starts last season as a freshman for the Vaqueros of UT Rio Grande Valley. Guy that I think can make an impact for a Western Michigan team that was much better offensively this past season. They were absolutely awful on the defensive side of things. They're going to be looking to improve that. And for Grand Valley, they were a presentable defensive team last season. I like Gomez's overall game. He was solid as a freshman, so I think that that's a big pickup for them moving forward. And then you had DeAndre Lindsey. He was over at Iona this past season, just was unable to get out there on the court. And he has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Tennessee State. He's a guy that stands 6'8", has a little bit of versatility, but he is a man that comes from the great state of Tennessee. A little bit of an unknown, but that's a nice pickup for a Tennessee State team that they had a really nice year last year. They were able to make the NCAA tournament for the first time in about 3 decades. Nolan Smith has formed himself into being a really nice coach, and I think that in future years, he's going to be looked at for some big opportunities. So we'll see what he's able to do with them, and we'll see what we all get here in the transfer portal in the offseason. And I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast. So if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one or two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And once the games return, you're going to get picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. In the meantime, we're going to be looking at the transfer portal, looking forward to trying to make the 2026-27 year the best ever, and you're going to get a specialized conference preview for all the conferences in college basketball. I think that we're going to have 31 for this upcoming season. That'll be coming once we have a few more known elements from the transfer portal, but I appreciate you guys tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. And also, shout out to Rocco Miller for joining me in the second segment. Always appreciate him, and always appreciate you. Thank you.